I thank at the outset the Academy for having given me this opportunity for presenting this talk. Some of this presentation is borrowed from a similar presentation that I gave 2 years ago, but there's some new material on Bangalore Nagarathnamma, including some sound recordings as well. At the very outset, I wish to acknowledge the help and the contribution made to this presentation by V. Sriram, a noted musical historian in Chennai, as well as the associate editor of Sruthi magazine, as well as former editor of the Sangeetham.com website. At the outset as well, I wish to apologize for some of the quality of the pictures that you'll see. Hopefully you'll see some good still pictures as well. But if anyone has access to good photographs of Bangalore Nagarathnamma or any of the pictures presented here, please do share them with me later on. In reality, this is a 1.5 hour presentation which I've tried to squeeze in about half hour. Hopefully you'll all get something out of it, just as much as in fact I got out of this in making this presentation itself. This wonderful Javali in the Kannada language, in the Kamas Raga, was a composition of Bangalore Nagarathnamma, the focus of our presentation today. Her link with the Tyagaraja Aradhana is intricate, and if we have the Tyagaraja Samiti, the Samadhi rather, in Tiruvayyaru, it is only because of the indomitable spirit of this wonderful lady. Tyagaraja passed away on the 5th day before the dark moon in the month of Kausya. It was a Sunday, and it was in the month of Prabhavanama. 6 days prior to it, he had a vision of his death, or of his passing, and he penned the beautiful song Giripai and Sahana that speaks of the vision that Tyagaraja had. He then embraced sannyasa, taking the name of Nada Brahman. On the appointed day, Tyagaraja, after giving offerings to Brahmanas, lapsed into meditation even as students sang his songs. This date corresponded to the 6th of January 1847. And since then, we've had, this is in fact the idol of Tyagaraja, and since then we've had several people, his disciples mainly, who perform the Aradhana regularly year after year. In those days it was mainly a religious ceremony. There was no followed by Shraddha, and there was no traditional musical singing as we have today. In 1855, several of Tyagaraja's direct disciples, by 1855, they're all kind of passed away, and the idol with which Tyagaraja used to offer his daily prayers had passed on from him to the home of Panchapakeshaya. The Vrindavanam, which was in the banks of the Kaveri river, had by then gone into a state of significant neglect. It was at that time that one of Tyagaraja's disciples had decided to resurrect the Samadhi. This was basically Umayalpuram Krishna Bhagavatar and Umayalpuram Sundara Bhagavatar. But then later on, as years passed, there was significant clashes between these two brothers, and as a result what happened was the formation of two separate schools which conducted the Aradhana at Tiruvayyaru. These came to be known as Chinna Kachi and Periya Kachi because of the two brothers. The elder brother formed the Periya Kachi and the younger brothers formed the Chinna Kachi. It was quite chaotic in those days, but for the residents of Tiruvayyaru itself, it was pretty good because they had free food for nearly 20 days and they had all sorts of singing that used to happen continually around the Aradhana time for more than 20 days. At that time, there were some rules that were laid down as to how the Aradhana had to be performed. And this included things like, for example, women could not perform. Nadaswaram was banned from being performed at the Aradhana. Some of these rules had no particular significance, and some of these rules had no special bearing at all. Enter Bangalore Nagarathnamma. Bangalore Nagarathnamma was a very impressive lady, and she was an icon of her times. She was highly skilled in the arts and was well regarded by connoisseurs of music. She was really an exceptional woman, much ahead of her times. And as we saw in the title slide, the book on her that V. Sriram had written last year is called The Devadasi and the Saint. Bangalore Nagarathnamma herself was the Devadasi, and it was her undying devotion for Tyagaraja that Sriram has tried to highlight in his book. She was truly an exceptional woman, and her devotion to Tyagaraja was legendary. In this next sound excerpt from V. Sriram, the author of that wonderful book, Devadasi and the Saint, he tells us why he decided to write this book on this fascinating lady, which is based on the life and times of Nagarathnamma.
I started researching on the life of Nagarathnamma 2 years ago, actually in 2005. I had first read about her life in 1983 when I read an issue of Sruthi magazine where there was a small article on her life. And it was a very fascinating life, I thought, which is why I wanted to take it up in detail when I took to serious writing on Carnatic music history. And I started only with that Sruthi article, but gradually I managed to get quite a few other sources. But many of them were in languages which I didn't know, like Telugu and Kannada. So I had to take the help of friends in order to translate that. And my researches on Nagarathnamma took me to places like Bangalore, Mysore, and then, of course, various parts of Madras city where she not only lived but also places where she had contributed in many ways, like building an entire market in Silver Tree Road, which was then later donated to the temple and things like that. I was also able to meet with a lot of people who had actually moved with her, who had known her, and who had interacted with her in many ways as students, as assistants, as people who had contributed money to the Tyagaraja Aradhana, and some of them who were just her friends. So it was a very fascinating exercise to watch a personality who had died more than 50 years ago come back to life through the words of these people. And that was in many ways itself a great reward and a very fulfilling activity. So when I put out the book, it was not just me who wrote it. There were many people who had come to me and who had told me about her. And in many ways, I think it was their contribution as well which contributed to it.
One of the people, in fact, that Sriram talked about in that little excerpt is in fact V.A.K. Rangarao, who's still alive today. He's alive and kicking, really. And he had, in fact, interacted with Nagarathnamma, who passed away really in our times. It's only 1952 that she passed away. And sadly, her 50th anniversary of her passing was almost forgotten in the musical circles. She was born on the 3rd of November 1878 to Subbarao, a native Vakil of Mysore, and Puttulakshmi. Puttulakshmi was a Devadasi and was patronized, if you like, by Subbarao. To understand Nagarathnamma's contribution to music, dance and the arts, and also the deification of Sri Tyagaraja, it is really important to understand the role that Devadasis played in temple culture and arts and culture itself in India at that time. They played, in my view, a significant role in the propagation, in the understanding and the learning and presentation of the arts. Next, we'll listen to a little clip. Now this is a play reading of the book Devadasi and the Saint. It was performed last year in December by the Madras Players Group, a group of actors who actually staged a play reading of Sri Ram's book, in which the introduction to the role that Devadasis played in ancient India is given by P.C. Ram. It's followed by a short song, Giripai, by three of Sanjay Subramaniam's students, Sandeep Narayan, Rahul Krishna, and Swarna Retas. And then Ram continues to finish off the role that Devadasis played in ancient India.
The concept of dedicating women to places of worship existed in Greece, in Rome, in Egypt, and in other ancient cultures. India was no exception. And this system was well developed in South India in particular. There was a rigid hierarchy among these women based on the duties they performed in the temple, which ranged from washing vessels to sweeping the floor to stringing garlands of flowers, grinding saddle legs, and at the highest level of sophistication, singing and dancing before the deity.
So as P.C. Ram says at the end, the Devadasis had absolute right to a lot of munificence from the temple, but that was all going to change. First Karnataka and then Tamil Nadu presented and prosecuted anti-Nauch and anti-Devadasi movements through which the rights of the Devadasis and their position in society would erode through a series of moralistic laws. All of this happened in Nagarathnamma's life, and that's important to understand the background and the context in which she led her life. Nagarathnamma, as we just heard, was born to Puttu Lakshmi and her patron Vakil Subbarao. The two separated soon after Nagarathnamma's birth, leaving the mother and the child in dire straits in the streets. Puttu Lakshmi was then patronized by Giribhatta Timmaya Shastri, who had a profound influence on Nagarathnamma's life initially. For about 9 years, she learned English, but Sanskrit, Telugu, music even from Giribhatta Timmaya Shastri. He was a Sanskrit scholar of the Mysore court at that time, and it was in fact Nagarathnamma's first guru. Nagarathnamma was like a sponge. She absolutely absorbed everything that Timmaya Shastri could throw at her. And it was by about 9 years old, so much so that Giribhatta himself became jealous of Nagarathnamma's profound proficiency in everything that he could teach her. He had both mother and daughter thrown out of his house. So again, Puttu Lakshmi was desperate on the streets, in dire straits, but the proud Devadasi took an oath that she would not return to Mysore unless the Mysore court itself invited Nagarathnamma. And so saying, the two left for Kanchipuram, where they sought the help of Dhanakoti Ammal. Dhanakoti Ammal was the guru of the great Kanchipuram Nayana Pillai, who was the master of Laya of those times. Dhanakoti's ill health meant that she could not teach the mother and the daughter, but she was able to keep them in her house and give her some shelter till the Nagarathnamma and Puttu Lakshmi could find another guru. It was then that Nagarathnamma went to Bangalore to seek the help of her brother Venkatasamappa, who was by then a violinist in Bangalore, and also his own friend Bangalore Munuswamappa then took on Bangalore Nagarathnamma as his disciple. Nagarathnamma at that time was barely 14-15 years old. She learned dance from Bangalore Kittanna. She learned Abhinaya from Madras Thiruvenkatachar. Soon Puttu Lakshmi died, and the young Nagarathnamma was on her own with her uncle Venkatasamappa, who had other designs for the young girl. But Guru Munuswamappa decided that Nagarathnamma had to be a singer and protected her from all the ills of the world. The Guru made a promise to Puttulakshmi on her deathbed that Nagarathnamma would earn money from the arts and not from the family's traditional livelihood. She learned vocal singing then from Bidaram Krishnappa, the well-known vocalist in the Mysore court, and a great singer in the lineage of Tyagaraja. Krishnappa learned from Veena Seshanna, who had himself been a disciple of Mysore Sadashiva Rao, who was from the Valajapet school. Sadashiva Rao had learned from Venkatramana Bhagavar. So Nagarathnamma had basically learnt music in the lineage of the great Saint Tyagaraja himself. In 1893, by a stroke of accident, Nagarathnamma was invited to perform at the house of Veena Seshanna. The Mysore Palace heard about the wonderful performance that she had given. And it was around that time that she had the prefix Bangalore to her name, although it became much more profound much later in her life, because she was vying in Bangalore for space with another Nagarathnamma, in that case Kolar Nagarathnamma. But on hearing of the wonderful performance at Veena Seshanna's house, the Mysore Palace in fact invited Nagarathnamma to perform at the Mysore Palace, thereby fulfilling the vow that Puttulakshmi had taken that Nagarathnam would not return to Mysore unless if she was invited by the court. Soon she started earning money as a musician, and not through her trade or not through the trade that her family had been involved in up until then. She was earning a lot of money as a musician, she was gaining a lot of fame as a musician, and she had her own set of admirers too in Mysore. And one of them was Justice Narahari Rao, a judge in the Mysore court. And the association was with Justice Narahari Rao was in fact a very happy one, although there were several occasions in which the two essentially extremely fierce and extremely independent individuals would have several fights. And it was in one of these periods of separation that Nagarathnamma penned the words to the beautiful Padam Matada Baradeno, which means, why wouldn't you talk to me? So it was, that was one of those instances where rapprochement was immediately possible. At this stage, Nagarathnamma was a well-rounded artist. She was a confident and a proud musician. She could hold her own in many languages, including Sanskrit, Telugu, English, and Tamil. She was a proficient singer. She was a great conversationalist. In fact, so oftentimes in the middle of her concert, she would launch into a conversation with the assembled audience. She was a dancer. She was an Abhinaya expert. She was also a violinist because of her training under Venkatasamappa and Munusamappa. So she was a thorough patron and profound performer of the arts. And through her association with Justice Narahari Rao, she had also gained an innate knowledge of law, legal matters, as well as commerce. However, in 1902, the Justice Narahari Rao passed away and handed Nagarathnamma in the care of C.S. Rajaratna Mudaliar, a famed businessman from Madras. Nagarathnamma relocated to Madras in 1903, aged 25. This is in fact a recording of Bangalore Nagarathnamma singing her favorite Yadukula Kamboji. This next clip in Kalyani that you're going to listen to, there is some contention between me and V. Sriram that it's actually not Nagarathnamma, it's possibly Madras Lilitangi, the mother of MLV. were personal favorites of hers, and she was requested to sing it often at her concerts. Nagarathnamma located herself in Georgetown, which was at that time the hub of musical activity in Chennai. It was really there that the Devadasi community had really lent color to the city and also to the arts and culture of the city at that time. There was a large contingent of singers and dancers in and around Georgetown. This included Coimbatore Thai, Salem Meenakshi, Mylapore Doraikannu, Mylapore Gauri, Dhanakoti sisters, Veena Dhanamal, of course, the queen bee of Devadasi performers at that time. And as we said before, Bangalore Nagarathnamma took the prefix Bangalore because of the presence of, and to distinguish herself from Kolar Nagarathnamma. Veena Dhanamal, it's reported, became a very good friend of Bangalore Nagarathnamma, even though Dhanamma was about 10 years Nagarathnamma senior. And although they were very, very unlike each other, Nagarathnamma was bold, brash, arrogant, and she would just have conversations with her artists, her co-rasikas. Dhanam was a really rigid, pious. She had a real respect for the way in which art had to be performed on stage. Musically also they were very, very different. In fact, Dhanamma's family really did not like Nagarathnamma singing at all, but they really had a lot of respect for each other and treated each other with a great amount of musical mateship as well, and built a long and standing friendship. Amidst all of this, Nagarathnamma became very, very seasoned in Chennai circles. She gave dance performances, she gave Harikatha performances, she gave live music performances, and in fact was one of the most one of the first artists that was recorded by the Gramophone and Typewriter Company of India, later to become the Gramophone Company of India. Yadukula Kamboji, as we heard, was one of her favorites, and used to be requested at all of her concerts. Although she, like Veena Dhanamal, did not like requests at all. In one of her concerts, she had a request for Kapi, and she's reported to have said, So she took up residence at number 7 Srinivasa Street, Georgetown, and she also at that time learned from Kuchi Srinivasa Iyengar. She became a very profound Harikatha performer and was recorded along, the first artist to be recorded along with Calcutta, Gauhar Jan, etc. Although she didn't actually like recording, there was a popular myth at that time that if you record, you're giving away your voice into this musical system, and it was as if you're transferring your diaphragm to the diaphragm of the recording device that sat there. But then let's remember that around 1910, which is when all of this is happening, the anti-Devadasi movement was really strong. It was gaining momentum. In Karnataka, it had already been implemented, and the anti-Nauch movement was something that was eroding into the arts as well. And it is in that context that Bangalore Nagarathnamma existed. And she was, as can be seen in these later day photographs, these are from about 1940 or so, she was a rather plump lady. She loved jewelry and perfumes, and always seemed to have a lot of money around her. She was the first the first woman artist to actually file her income tax in India. So that's how powerful she was, and that's how wealthy she was by then, just from her musical performances. Her house, she was a very hospitable person. Her house was always overflowing with people. And it is said that in one concert that she attended at Veena Seshana's house, who was also mad keen on perfumes, Bangalore Nagarathnamma, at the end of the concert, received her concert remuneration along with a bottle of perfume. And as she was walking out the house, she saw this stack of perfumes that Veena Seshana had and said, and he just handed over the entire almirah to Nagarathnamma because he knew of her passion for perfumes. She had no children, and even considered adoption in those days. a common practice among Devadasis. And interestingly, Brahmins would also give one of their child, or maybe the last child, in adoption to the Devadasis because of the way in which they nurtured the arts and they actually performed rites at the temple itself. After all, a close friend of Nagarathnamma, Perumal Kovil Narayanamma, had just adopted Lalitangi from a Brahmin household. And of course, Lalitangi went on to become MLV's mother and so on. But Nagarathnamma did adopt a child, and it didn't quite work out, and she had to give away the child because the child tried to poison the mother. Later on, she did go on to become extremely close to a young girl called Bunny Bai, whose name was actually not Bunny Bai. She only died in 1995 or so. Bunny Bai later on went on to pen the biography of Nagarathnamma, and it was a visiting professor from the north that saw this very, very colorful, white, fair lady and named her Bunny Bai in those days. But Nagarathnamma herself did not have a child. She was, in her later days, very lonely and had a dog and a parrot for company. In Georgetown, even some of the performing musicians were frightened of the dog because it was said to bark in perfect Shruti. And Veena Dhanam is said to have tuned her Veena to the star of the dog. And this also has a mirror from the north, where Abdul Karim Khan's dog used to bark whenever someone would go off Shruti. But it was around this time that Nagarathnamma's devout bhakti for Tyagaraja came to the fore. She performed from about 1920 onwards. She continued to perform Harikathas only, and that too on Tyagaraja's life. In 1921, she had a vision and a dream one night of Tyagaraja blessing her in her dream. Ironically and coincidentally, the very next day, she had a letter from Bidaram Krishnappa, her initial guru, who pointed